Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Furious Devotion, The Life of Shane MacGowan, by Richard Balls, narrated by Dan Calley. Publisher's Note. In this audio edition, you may hear references to visual elements present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Prologue. June 2012, London. Across the road from a private clinic in Belgravia, I wait, watching for the door to open. Shane MacGowan has an appointment, and I have arranged to meet him afterwards and interview him for a book about stiff records. The rendezvous has been set up by Shane's old friend, Paul Ronan, with whom he stays in London. I haven't met Shane before, so don't know what to expect. My instinct tells me to go with the flow. The heavy door of the exclusive doctor's surgery opens, and the two of them emerge. Shane is tall, with a loping gait, his eyes obscured behind thick black shades. I introduce myself and we shake hands, but he's a man on a mission. He sets off gamefully alongside the black railings, and it's clear this is no time for conversation. At the end of the pavement, Shane turns into a cobbled side street. Suddenly, he stops and sways, a gigantic trail of snot dangling from his nose. He snorts it onto the street, takes a slug of water from the plastic cup he's holding, before throwing that down and carrying on. Around the corner, we settle at a small table outside a bistro. Shane is anxious. His appointment has interrupted his drinking, and he seems twitchy as he waits for his order to arrive. However, once the waiter returns with his bottle of rosé champagne, he relaxes and, when it seems safe to do so, I switch on my recorder and begin asking some questions. Paul helps to steer things along and encourages him to chat. Shane's rambling recollections about the record label that took a chance on the Pogues are punctuated with his notorious snigger, "Tsh," which sounds like someone gargling with gravel. At one point, he falls asleep on the recorder, and I have to gently prise it from under him. He disappears off to the toilet, and when after some time he doesn't return, I ask Paul if he's okay. He assures me Shane is fine, but I'm not convinced, and I head to the gents to investigate. Inside, I discover Shane has locked himself in a cubicle and is hammering on the door for help. I encourage him to simply turn the handle, but it's no good, and a key is fetched by the staff to get him out. His motor skills seem shot. Several times he clumsily knocks his cutlery through the slats in the wooden table, and I end up helping him light his cigarettes as he struggles to do it himself. Food is spilled down his shirt. He is not drunk, but the years of abuse have taken their toll, as indicated by the carrier bag of medication with which he emerged from the clinic. It is clear that I am in the company of a highly intelligent, extremely well-read man with an encyclopedic knowledge of pretty much everything. There are moments of irascibility, but overall, Shane is good company. He enjoys recounting stories and chuckles away to himself as he remembers funny things that have happened. I ask him to sign a couple of items, and he is happy to oblige. "Sir Richard, you boring asshole. Shane, kiss." He scrawls in the front of Victoria's book. Paul takes a photograph with the two of us raising a glass. There is no ego at play here. Shane is generous, and there is a kindness in his eyes. Definitely. I want to know so much more about him than his association with stiff records, and a couple of years later, I ask Paul, with whom I have stayed in touch, if Shane would be open to me writing his biography. To my surprise, he replies that Shane is not against the idea. And that's how it starts. June 2018, Dublin. My eyes open and I gaze around blearily. I'm on a mattress on the floor of an office, and it takes a few moments for the morning fog to lift. Then I remember. I'm in Shane MacGowan's flat, and although last night was a late one for me, I had left the others to carry on, knowing they would still be at it by daylight. I pull on some clothes and pad along the corridor to the sitting room. Shane's tousled hair is poking up over the top of his armchair. He hasn't gone to bed and is still watching TV. Sleep is something he does without any routine. It simply comes over him wherever he happens to be. Day blurs into night and night into day. When I leave the flat to go for a walk or get food or a pint, I leave Shane's world and rejoin the one outside. Well, that's how it seems. I wonder if it is possible to find out who this man really is and if I am on a fool's errand. Shane detests being interviewed and asked about his work. He will only talk when he is in the mood. Even then, it is hard to make out what he is saying, especially over the TV, which is never turned off. One documentary maker compared working with him to wildlife photography, and it's a good analogy. So, I sit with him and Paul and whoever else is around and wait for an opening. We watch the World Cup, which Shane loves, but mostly violent films. "We've missed a lovely garroting," he complains when I distract him with my questions during The Godfather. One night, I'm about to go to bed when Shane asks me to make him a cup of tea, black with 1 sugar. I sense he might want to talk, so I fetch my recorder and sit with him, grabbing an unexpected opportunity. I've learned that he can be ill-tempered, his invective erupting from nowhere. One night he tells me he is exhausted from trying to explain the bloody obvious things, and that it is more fun being interviewed by the police. I politely apologize, desperate not to lose a window of opportunity, and hesitantly ask if I can turn the TV down, as I can't hear what he is saying. This is a high-risk strategy, given that he could easily react by turning it up even louder. "Yes, turn it down, but don't fucking go on all night about it," he growls. "I've got some great stories about the filth." "Well, let's hear them," I reply, and off we go again, as if nothing has happened. Over 2 years I spend a great deal of time with Shane. Sometimes I am just sitting with him, chatting and watching TV. At other times, I try to get answers to questions that have arisen through the extensive interviews I have conducted with his family, friends and former bandmates. Some of these never get resolved, and probably never will be, but I am determined not to give up in my quest to sort the myths from the truths and better understand this shy and complex man. Chapter 1. The Little Man. I sat for a while at the cross at Finnow, where young lovers would meet when the flowers were in bloom, heard the men coming home from the fair at Shinrone, their hearts in Tipperary wherever they go. The broad, majestic Shannon, the Pogues. Shane gazed out glassily on the audience which had filled Dublin's National Concert Hall in January 2018 on a night of competing emotions. Gripped in his hand was the Lifetime Achievement Award bestowed on him by the distinguished venue and presented by its patron and the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins. Not far from Shane's mind was the memory of his mother, Therese, who had died just a year earlier. A tear had been shed for her when he had listened to Finbar Fury's sublime rendition of Kitty, the song Shane had learned from her as a child. Away from the unbridled excitement in the hall, Shane had quietly watched the performance on a monitor, pride intermingled with grief. There was no acceptance speech. He sat in his wheelchair listening to the whoops and cheers and looking across a sea of mobile phones. As the president left the stage and the evening ended, Shane simply raised his glass. "Good night and good luck. Shh," he slurred. A reminder that an artist who has penned so many memorable words is, in fact, a man of very few. The occasion, as well as recognizing his quite unique talents as a writer, underlined the extraordinary nature of the journey Shane MacGowan has made in Ireland. The Pogues were seen as a violation of traditional music by purists and some in the media when they gate-crashed the pop scene, with Shane accused of playing to the pissed-up Paddy image that 1980s Ireland was so desperate to cast off. That the band came from across the water and their singer had more of an English accent than an Irish one only made them more unpalatable. So, as Shane received a standing ovation, both from the sellout crowd and a lineup of guests that read like a who's who of Irish music, his unlikely transformation from the rank outsider looking in through the window to national hero was complete. No wonder there were tears in the house. To those who were there that night and to fans the world over, Shane MacGowan is as Irish as St. Patrick himself. Over his career, he has aligned himself ever more closely with his native country and in media interviews has lasered in on the remote cottage where he first encountered people playing traditional instruments and dancing on the stone-flagged kitchen floor. However, the Pogues could never have emerged from Ireland's shores. And it was when memories of idyllic childhood holidays in Tipperary were hotwired with those from his markedly different adolescence in London that Shane blessed us with The Old Main Drag, A Pair of Brown Eyes, and A Rainy Night in Soho. "He is as paddy as they come," says producer Steve Lillywhite. "But he grew up in England and in London, so he had much more of an English punk rock way of thinking, from the nipple erectors early on, than Irish. So the fact that he grew up in England, but he was an Irishman, there is a schizophrenia that comes from that as well." Many people believe Shane was born in Tipperary and not Pembury, near the quintessentially English town of Tunbridge Wells, Kent. This common misconception was only encouraged by the BBC's 1997 documentary, The Great Hunger, The Life and Songs of Shane MacGowan, which stated that he was born on the banks of the River Shannon in rural Ireland. This and other subsequent films have concentrated heavily on his mother's family and his time spent at their remote cottage. Much less has been said about his father's relatives, some of whom still live in England, and around whom Shane spent a great deal of his early life. Their recollections are shared here for the first time, along with those of his closest friends, musicians, ex-lovers, and even his former English teacher. Most have never been approached before, despite some of them having had a significant impact on his life and career. While the story of the Pogues has been well documented, the complete and frequently surprising journey of their notorious frontman from outcast to national treasure has never been told, until now. I step into the Commons, a cottage in a remote part of Tipperary, dipping my head under the lintel as I do so, and I am transported back 200 years. The Sacred Heart statues draped in cobwebs, the abandoned accordion on top of a cupboard, the blackened stone fireplace. No one has lived here for years, but a fire has been lit to warm it through. It is not hard to see why this place came to be so romanticised by Shane, somewhere untouched by time and a world away from the built-up English suburbs where he grew up. His sister Siobhan, an author in her own right, has kindly arranged for family members to gather here and share their memories of the boy they called the Little Man. A generous pot of tea, or tay in Irish, is poured, and I am introduced to them all. His aunts, his cousins. As the stories start to flow, you can almost hear, ghost-like, the music and dancing that once tested the stability of its thick stone walls. This is the place Shane still calls home and where, in the snug bosom of his family, he first sang and played Irish music. "Shane loved it here, and he'd come for months and months at a time," says his aunt, Vicky Cahill. "I think he liked the way they lived. He liked their easygoing way of life. He loved the countryside. When he was that little, he didn't realise how much he loved the countryside, but he did. He loved the music and the dancing and the way everybody wandered in and out, and he knew them all." The Commons is in Calley, a townland in the parish of Finnow, about 8 miles from Nenagh and 3 from Borrisokane. It is a traditional teach-in, a thatched farm worker's cottage that could stand as a heritage centre today. There is a parlour, 2 small rooms with single beds, and a kitchen on the ground floor. Brave the steep stairs and you find a cramped attic space where Shane's LPs are strewn across the floor. The original structure was apparently extended about 90 years ago, and it is remarkable to think that it was home to Shane's great-grandparents, John and Mary Lynch, and their 11 children, Margaret, Pat, Julia, Ellen, Nora, John, Jim, Mikey, Bridget, William and Tom. Shane is well versed in his family's genealogy and always happy to talk about his beloved Commons. "They move in with this old woman who was a cousin," he says of his great-grandparents. "She was a Darcy, and the Darcys had been run out of Ireland. We were rebels, they were rebels. There's a whole clan of us around the area, and in other areas there would be other clans, and we would all get together for bigger things. They moved in to look after this woman, and she promised them the house." John Lynch became a well-known figure in the area. He was associated with the Irish National Land League, which sought to abolish landlordism in Ireland and enable tenant farmers to own the land they worked. He also wrote himself into the history books of the Gaelic Athletic Association, GAA, by becoming the first chairman of the hurling and Gaelic football club Shannon Rovers. A framed photograph of him still hangs on the wall in the parlour, and the resemblance to his great-grandson Shane is inescapable. Of the Lynch clan, it was the eldest, John, who worked full-time on the family farm and ended up taking it over. These were hard times in rural Ireland. Everyone had to help, including Tom, who was killed in a tragic accident with the threshing machine. Some of the other Lynch sons worked for North Tipperary County Council, while several of the girls were excellent seamstresses, among them Nora and Julia, and Shane's grandmother Margaret or Maggie. Nowadays, the thought of so many people living cheek by jowl in a stone cottage with no inside toilet or bathroom is unimaginable. However, as the light dimmed on 19th century Ireland, such a basic existence was normal in rural communities. What was less typical at a time when the Catholic Church still had a barnacle-like hold on the population was Maggie's decision to leave her husband and move back to the Commons with her 2 young children. She had met and married John Cahill, a guard at the local station, and moved with him to Dublin where they started a family. Their first child and Shane's mother, Therese Mary, was born on 20th September 1929, and exactly 1 year later she was joined by her brother Sean. But John was an alcoholic, and when the marriage foundered, Maggie and the children returned to the Commons. Mummy used to say the Lynches were terribly soft and innocent, but Mum and Uncle Sean's mother was a shrewd woman, comments Siobhan MacGowan. She could see through a lot of the old plumbers, nonsense, that might be going on. She left her husband, which in those days she just didn't do. She was a strong character, and she let our dad have it a few times. The Lynches very much supported her decision, though, because at one point her husband, John Cahill, wrote to her begging her to come back. She was wavering, and they absolutely forbid it. They did everything in their power to stop her going back to him. Shane says, "He was a drunken guard. The only people who complained about him were a few landlords who objected to him turning up and banging on the door with his nightstick. He would arrive with a bunch of other drunks and demand to be let in. And you always let the cops in, especially if you were open that late already. He was very dominating, but he was also a man with a great heart. Everybody loved him, but they feared him if they fucked up. He got kicked out of the Guards. He had come down from Westmeath and was a first cousin of Dermot O'Brien. He was a second cousin of mine and a first cousin of Patricia Cahill, a famous singer." Therese was a bright pupil at both Kilbarron National Primary School and St Mary's Convent School near Nenagh, where she did her secondary education. Her essays were lauded by teachers, just as Shane's would be 30 years later, says Siobhan. She was a fluent Irish speaker who enjoyed studying and an ardent reader. Had university been an option for a young woman in 1940s Ireland, she would almost certainly have gone on to do a degree. But these were different times. Not surprisingly, given her upbringing at the Commons, Therese possessed a fine singing voice, and she won contests in the Feis Ceoil, an annual celebration of Irish music that continues today. The whole family at the Commons were all great singers. My mother was an amazing singer, Shane says proudly. She won the adult singing prize at the main Feis when she was 3. She had a mature voice at 3, not as mature as it became a bit later, but she never had a little girl voice. Catherine Leach, a relative by marriage on Morris's side, referred to by Shane as Auntie Catherine, adds, "Therese had a lovely singing voice. She'd sing all sorts of songs. She'd sing Irish songs. All I remember is that I could sit and listen to Therese." After leaving school, Therese worked as a secretary, first in Limerick and then in Dublin. In Limerick, she attracted the attention of local man Tony Portley, who was studying at University College Dublin and was a close friend of Maurice MacGowan. Tony was keen on Therese and even gave up smoking so he could afford to take her out. "She was knocking around with Tony Portley and getting free meals. That's what she did," says Shane. "If nobody else was offering one, and it didn't happen that often, she could always get a meal off Tony." It was Tony who introduced Therese to Maurice, and it quickly became clear that in doing so he had made a fatal error. Like Therese, Maurice had a deep passion for literature. He read poetry to her in her small rented bedsit in Dublin, and they began spending more and more time together. "Tony realised that he didn't have a chance fairly early," explains Shane. Maurice and Therese, were walking out for ages before they actually started courting. My dad forked out a whole week's wages for a copy of Ulysses, but she burnt it when she got to the first bit of obscenity. They had this stove, and if it went out, they would freeze to death, so they had to keep it going. She could have put one of her Edna O'Brien books in, but instead she put in that brand new Ulysses that had just come out and he had spent all his money to get because it was disapproved of strongly by the church. So it was very expensive for a book. Mind you, he didn't just rely on a week's wages. He was a very good gambler on the horses. He had a great economic brain. Therese was extremely busy in Dublin and earned money from modelling as well as from her secretarial job. On 18th of March 1957, she was named Irish Colleen by the Evening Press and given front-page billing. She did loads of modelling and became Ireland's top model for a while, Shane says proudly. She was on the front of all the papers, pictured with 3 wolfhounds. That was taken in the same place as Van Morrison laid down with wolfhounds on the cover of Eden Fleece. Her striking looks drew plenty of male attention, including that of the poet and novelist Patrick Kavanagh. Siobhan says, he saw Mum and Dad walking over Leeson Street Bridge one day and was said to have asked Mum afterwards if she was involved with that fella. Mum said she was, and Patrick Kavanagh said to her he had thought she was because he saw them shouting at one another and knew they were trying to communicate. Adds Shane. She met Patrick Kavanagh loads of times. He used to pick up girls from the country. He just liked talking to them and writing poetry about them. He was pretty attractive to women, especially girls from the country. He was the prince of Irish writers and poets. Therese also did some acting and was offered a tour with a theatre company, an invitation she declined as, by that time, she was set on marrying Morris. They tied the knot on 1st of August 1956 at Kilbarron Church, just a couple of miles from the Commons. For their honeymoon, the newlyweds borrowed Morris's dad's car and drove around Ireland. Morris remembers staying at the Old Ground Hotel in Ennis, County Clare, and stopping off at the Galway races during their 2-week trip. Although they had much in common, Morris's upbringing in suburban Dublin had been very different from Therese's life in a remote village, and it is one that offers another perspective on his son's Irish heritage. Shane's great-great-grandfather, John MacGowan, was a leading house builder who developed parts of Rainlay in South Dublin, where there was once a MacGowan terrace named after him. He married Belinda Lycett, a daughter of landed gentry whose surname would later be given to Morris, Shane and Siobhan as a middle name. One of John and Belinda's children, referred to in the family as the Rainlay Five, was Shane's great-grandfather William, and it was his conversion to Catholicism to marry Jane White that ended the Protestant MacGowan line. The marriage is said to have been a disastrous one, and he more or less deserted his wife and 2 sons, William and Noel. Such was William's ill feeling towards his father that he later changed his name to Morris. Shane's grandfather took law exams as a youngster, but eventually joined the civil service and worked his way up to be Deputy Registrar of the Land Registry. After taking early retirement, he returned to his interest in legal matters and became a barrister. He married Eileen Green, known as Lena, who came from a steel-making family in Sheffield and who had had a difficult start in life. Her mother had died young and her father was an alcoholic, leaving Lena to be raised by her stern maternal grandfather. The couple had 4 children, Sybil, Madeline, William, Billy, and Morris. Sybil married Belfast man René Harriman, and when he got a job in a London bank, they moved to Tunbridge Wells in Kent, where she started the children's salon. The clothing company is run today by her daughter Michelle Harriman-Smith, and is a global online empire named Children's Salon. Billy trained as a surgeon and became a professor and registrar at the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin. Madeline tragically succumbed to tuberculosis, which claimed the lives of many thousands of people in Ireland in the first half of the 20th century. She died, aged just 18. Morris Matthew Lycett MacGowan was born in Dublin on 7th October 1929, and his sharp intellect was clear from a young age. Billy found that while he read comics in bed, his younger brother was devouring huge encyclopedias from the family's generously stocked bookshelves. So advanced was his reading age that he gained early entry to Belvedere College, a Jesuit school for boys in the heart of the city, where he excelled. At University College Dublin, he was awarded first-class honours in his BA and MA, both of which were in political economy and national economics. His BA was put on show at an exhibition. Morris had a particular flair for Latin and Greek, writing his own translations of the Greek plays, and he would later take Shane and Siobhan to professional performances of them in London, to their dread. Later in life, he penned a series of satirical plays and poetry under the pseudonym of George Geneva, which he now says will serve as his epitaph. Have a laugh on George Geneva, whose pseudonym he never needed, as all his works went quite unheeded. After completing his studies, Morris worked in stocks and shares for a firm in Dublin owned by the Brenningmeyers, the Dutch family who had founded the C&A clothing chain. The company clearly considered him an asset because, when the Dublin operation was closed, he was offered a position at its headquarters in London's Marble Arch. Morris was to be head of personnel administration, designing pension schemes, salary structures, and taking on other economics-related work. So, following his job offer, he and Therese took the big decision to emigrate to England. There was very little employment, really, said Therese in the documentary If I Should Fall from Grace with God, broadcast on the Irish channel TG4. Many people had to go abroad to either England or America or somewhere else to actually earn a living, and Morris was one of those, really. So we had to go to London. A farewell party was held on 29th of August 1957, and Morris and Therese, who was now pregnant with Shane, followed in the footsteps of so many in Ireland by emigrating to England. Initially, the young couple found it hard to adjust to life in a small rented flat. We started off in Ealing, which I hated with a great hatred, said Morris in the same documentary. Coming from Dublin, it was a real dreary London suburb. However, as was common for the Irish diaspora, Therese and Morris had relatives who had already settled in the UK and could help with their transition. Sybil and Renee were about an hour and a half away in affluent Tunbridge Wells, and Morris and Therese would regularly visit their large detached home in Madeira Park, bought in 1953 and referred to in the family as Mad Park. Britain was experiencing a cold winter in 1957, as the Queen was preparing to make her very first televised Christmas speech. Through the snow, Morris and a heavily pregnant Therese drove to Kent to wait for the arrival of their first baby. His parents and his brother Billy and his family had come over from Dublin so they could be there for the birth, and as Morris and Therese would be staying at Madeira Park, it was decided the baby should be delivered at the nearest maternity hospital. Shane says, "It was my dad's idea to visit them for Christmas to cut out the cost. Just because you got to think of the baby now." Shane Patrick Lycett MacGowan was born on Christmas Day 1957 at Pembury Hospital. As a Christmas Day baby, his arrival was duly reported in the local press, and he was the subject of plenty of attention. Therese recalled, "Because he was the Christmas baby, the matron, the doctors, the nurses, the mayor actually, came to give him gifts, and he was photographed and hung up on the wall in the hospital, a sign of things to come." But the festive mood on the maternity ward meant Therese was overlooked by the staff, according to Morris. "He was the Christmas baby, and all the buggers were celebrating," he remembers. "Therese was roaring in pain, and she got very little attention. She never forgot that. They were very poor with her." When Therese left hospital, they returned to Sybil and Renee's at Madeira Park, but there was no cot for Shane, leading to a family legend that was passed on down the years. Paul Harriman, Sybil's son and Shane's cousin, says, "The story is that when she came out on Boxing Day, they came back here, and Billy and Joan were already here with their son Nick, Shane's first cousin, who had the cot. So Shane was put in a drawer of the chest of drawers, which was very sensible." His sister Michelle, who still lives in the house, adds, "My mother was quite into it, putting babies in drawers who came to stay the night." Shane's birth certificate shows that his proud parents registered him on 2nd of January 1958, with Renee and Sybil's home at 23 Madeira Park given as their address. Morris's profession was recorded as company executive. In fact, the first 2 years or so of Shane's life, aside from holidays, was spent at the ground floor flat in Woodfield Avenue, Ealing. It was here that Shane made a great impression on Miss Lamb, an older woman who lived upstairs, and a photograph from this time shows the two of them together, Shane brandishing a toy knife. "Miss Lamb was an old servant of the Brenningmeyers, and she was a great character," says Morris. "She knew them all from when they were little, and she talked about little William Brenningmeyer. She adored Shane. Mother, too, she called herself." Shane was about 3 when his family moved to Tunbridge Wells. They rented part of 50 Claremont Road, a large terraced house close to Madeira Park, with Shane going to a local play school. The following year they relocated to Saltdean in Brighton, where he started at St Martha's Convent School in Rottingdean. Shane's sister Siobhan was born on 22nd of February.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?